Good morning and thank you for being present for this webinar on the Attract initiative. To put it at its briefest and most direct, we want to provide funding in lots of 100,000 euros. We have 170 such funding opportunities available through Attract. We've built a straightforward application process, which I will talk about later on. If your proposal is successful, we want you to do the work in a year. During that year, the oversight overhead will be fairly lightweight so that you can get on with the work. The deliverables have also been designed not to be too heavy. We want, obviously, the proposal. We want a public summary of what you propose in about 350 words. At the end of the project, we'll need another public summary of what you've done, a journal type article, a poster, and the attendance of at least one of the members of the proposal team at what we're calling a final assessment conference in Brussels in September 2020. So this is Attract, a 20 million euro project funded by Horizon 2020 through the Commission. So let's get on with it. So what's our premise? Well, our premise is that Europe is extremely good at developing science and technology. And a lot of this is done by exploring the boundaries of fundamental science. And if you think of an organization like CERN and the amount of technology they had to develop to do their fundamental science, you can see that exploring the boundaries of science both generates new knowledge and generates new technologies. Now, we think that with the right ecosystem, these technologies developed to enable science can also enable innovations that will create new industries and transform society. So we want to build that ecosystem to serve science, to engage with industry and others to enable innovation, which is the process of turning science into a new form of value, be it a product or a service, or some kind of other form of societal value, and also to stimulate entrepreneurial young talent. And I'll come back to that last point as we go along. So that's our premise. Now, where can we find these breakthroughs? Well, it turns out that Europe has invested a very large amount of money in national and pan-European research infrastructure organizations. And as I said, CERN is a good example of this. Enormous amounts of technology were developed in order to find the Higgs boson, for example. And a lot of that was technology which just hadn't been created before, hadn't been available before because of the nature of their work. But there's a database of Europe's research infrastructure organizations, and it runs to about, I think, 1,100. So enormous richness there of organizations serving science, and in doing so also creating technology. Now, the European Commission has funded a lot of science. Obviously, it's funded a lot of research infrastructure organizations and research organizations, but it's also keen to see that science pulled through into innovations which can create new products, new services, societal value. And so that's an important driver in the Attract project. Funding breakthrough science, but shortening the path between it and value creation for Europe and Europeans. So how can we make this happen? Well, we have to narrow our view somewhat. We cannot manage and run a project about all technologies. derived from research infrastructure organizations. So we're narrowing our view to detection and imaging technologies, or sensing and imaging technologies, if you like. And these, of course, are the tools with which we turn, the signals of science, the signals of science into something which is which can be processed and analyzed later. And so sensing and imaging technologies are a background for European science, a backbone for European science and its R&D communities. Now, it's also the case that industry also needs sensing and imaging technologies. Better sensors means better data, means better analysis, means more optimized industrial applications. And if you think of, running a factory, if you improve the quality of the sensors, you should get better process control. Better sensors can also support Industry 4.0, which is the sort of mass digitalization of industry beyond its uptake of ICT to date, and really to turning industry into a digitally driven operation. And better sensors also support moves like the shift to an Internet of Things, through which we're all going to, the world that we live in will be much more richly sensed, analyzed, and acted upon. And the last point here is also that we feel that sensing and imaging technologies are enabling the emergence of fast-moving innovations, especially in SMEs. So if you think on the sensing side of it, and you think of something like autonomous vehicles, there have been a lot of acquisitions of sensing and sensing-related technologies to enable autonomous vehicles. There's a real scramble for the right technology to make driverless cars possible. If you think about imaging technologies and analysis, I think we've all become very aware over the last 2.5 years of the power of machine learning, object recognition and classification in images, and just how much that is going to do for us. So technologies in those areas are where we're focusing. Now, as I said earlier, we want to support really breakthrough science, but we also want to shorten its path to market, to application, to the delivery of value. And so we built a balanced partnership of consortium members to try and do that. So on the left, you'll see the research infrastructure organizations, which are part of the consortium. And they are the European Synchrotron Radiation Facility, ILL Neutrons for Science, CERN, which holds the Project Administration Office, the European Southern Observatory, the European Molecular Biology Lab, and EXFAL in Hamburg, the Extreme Free Electron Laser Source. And if you're lucky enough to visit any of those people and go behind the scenes, you'll see there's some really staggering technology developed in the service of science. Really very impressive stuff. And you think, I wonder what the rest of the world could do with that. Now, if we want to turn science into innovations, we're going to need people with entrepreneurial mindsets. And so we have the Alto Design Factory up in Espoo as one of the entrepreneurship partners, and ISADE Business School down in Barcelona, providing those inputs. And ISADE will teach an entrepreneurship course for those who want it from the funded project teams. And Alto University will apply a technique called design thinking, which is a way of getting students to think about a new technology in terms of how users would apply it. And the value of that approach is that because they have no preconceptions. They just look at the technology, think about how it could be applied as a user, and then work from there. And so they can do, they can reveal surprising uses of a new technology that perhaps the people who have created it hadn't thought of themselves. For the industry link, we have EIRMA, which is the European Industrial Research Management Association, which is the organisation I'm representing, and that's 100 of Europe's largest investors in industrial research and development. So think companies like Siemens, like Philips, like Solvay, like IBM, like Michelin, like Nestle, big companies spending very large amounts of money doing exactly what Attract is trying to do, turning ideas and better science into some sort of societal value. And then obviously the European Commission is funding Attract, and it's absorbing the risk of this kind of early uncertain work, for which of course we thank them. So what are we looking for? Well, we're really looking for breakthrough science and technology with a pathway into an innovation process. So breakthroughs, define it for yourself how you like, but better technology performance, much lower cost, much better price performance, combinations of existing technologies in ways that shift the state of the art. And that's an interesting thing to think about. If you think about a radiation sensor and you think about Internet of Things strategies, if you combine those two things, perhaps you have an internet of radiation sensors. It becomes widely distributed, capturing data from a large area, and then maybe we learn something new about the distribution of radiation in the environment. So again, the point of that example is combinations. What we're not really looking for is incremental improvements of existing technologies or practices. 20% bump in performance or reduction in price performance or cost is incremental to us. So this is a place to be ambitious and to reach for something. So how's the open call process going to work? Well, the call, as I'm sure you know, has been open since the beginning of August, and we closed the call for submissions at 23:59 on the 31st of October. The funding is €100,000, and that's awarded as a lump sum so that you can be certain over the brief 12-month period that you've got to do this work, that you've got the money in hand. You're not trying to match your work to tranches of funding arriving at different times. It's money in hand, 12 months, get on with it. Now, there's a web-based submission portal through which you apply, and that's supported with quite a lot of guideline material and documents that I'll go through in a moment, but they are really the source of the detailed information about how to apply, what we're looking for, and so on. Now, important point here, and I'm emphasizing this and probably will continue to emphasize this, this isn't just about funding some high risk, potentially high reward science projects. This is about funding projects like that, which also show that the team who have proposed those projects have also thought about how that science, that technology could be applied, and what kind of people would use it, how it could be used, how it could be applied, how it could create value. So breakthrough science and a demonstration of a link into the beginnings of the innovation process, which is of course different from the research process. And so to facilitate that, we built an independent research development and innovation committee, or we've recruited one. who stand completely apart from the project consortium board that I'm on, and from the project advisory committee who are overseeing all this work. And that independent committee is going to manage a balanced assessment of the proposals. That's their job. And so they will be looking, I'll go through the evaluation criteria in a moment, but it's their job to strike that balance between breakthrough science and a demonstration of some kind of thinking about application. So to narrow again our focus from all of science done to Europe to detection, sensing and imaging technology, we created 5 categories from which we want proposals. And the first is sensors. And I had an interesting conversation with a potential applicant last week about whether the project they were thinking of would apply. And I had to write back and say, well, if your project is something which will turn us, which will capture a change in its environment and create a signal representing that, then yes, that fits. So think about sensors in a broad sense, go back to what they do, and then think forward from that. Front end and back end electronics, in other words, the electronics which is closest to the sensors, and then the electronics that helps massage those signals and capture them and clean them up for onward analysis. Data acquisition systems, similarly, part of that pipeline of capturing a change in the environment and turning it into something that you can record and analyze. Software, again, very broadly scoped, but basically software that does something with a sensor signal. Then integrations, and I think I've talked about that before. Interesting ways of combining technologies in new ways. So that could be something at the sort of cloud level, or it could be something, I think, something which enables you to take a sensor into an environment which it's not been possible to sense before. So the sensor technology exists, but the environment is harsh in some way. And so this new form of integration enables that sensor to sense that harsh environment. What sort of teams are we looking for? Well, we have drawn this very broadly, and really the requirement here is teams of at least 2 independent legal entities from EU member states or Horizon 2020 associated countries, each of which needs to get a PIC from the European Commission. So we're not asking you for a particular geographic distribution. We're not ruling out 2 organizations from the same country. You don't need to include North and South. It's just 2 independent legal entities. Now, again, we're trying not to restrict those who can apply and how they can apply. So any legal entity can participate in more than one proposal. Each team can submit multiple proposals. So if you have a breakthrough science or technology idea, and there could be 3 different ways in which to progress it, then you can produce a proposal for each of those, if that's what you want to do. Each of them pushing forward some aspect of your overall research work. That would be fine. Each of the proposals needs to meet all the criteria and the requirements of the application process, but it's fine to put multiple applications in from a single team. It's fine for individual legal entities to be in multiple teams. How are the projects going to run? Well, as I've said, it's a strict 12 months. The project monitoring strategy is pretty lightweight, with periodic check-ins from the Attract Consortium by email. Our monitoring is going to focus on detecting technical issues or financial anomalies. That's what it's about. The deliverables, again, fairly straightforward. So as I've said, a summary of the project's goals, which becomes publicly available once the successful proposals have been announced. A final summary of the project in a PDF format at a maximum of 2,000 characters, so I reckon that's about 350 words. A journal type article summarizing the project methodology and results. A poster presenting the project, and the presence of at least one of the project team members at the final assessment conference that I mentioned earlier, which will showcase all the project's results and should also provide an opportunity for making new partnerships, seeking further funding if the work has gone well, should enable you to look at what others have done, perhaps find partners, perhaps find private investment. So we're hoping to create, in September 2020, a big nexus of new science, new technology, and early stage innovation work in Brussels, all around sensing, detection, and imaging. Our timeline, well, you're all well aware of this first bullet because that's right where we are. And as I've said, we're closing the open call on the 23:59 on the 31st of October. From the beginning of November to the end of February, that's when the Independent Research Development and Innovation Committee does its work of choosing the 170 best projects from the proposals we've got, given that they've been tasked with this balanced assessment, which combines, the quality of the idea with the credibility of its pathway into an innovation process. Once the projects have been evaluated, we have 2 months to tell the successful proposal teams and get them to sign a third-party project agreement. And that's a pretty straightforward document which defines the rights and responsibilities of the successful project teams and their relationship with the Attract Consortium that's providing the funding. And of course, Attract itself has got a similar, much more complex document between the Project Consortium and the Commission. Next May, 1st of May 2019, your 12-month clock starts. And that's the 12 months in which you get the money and you do the work. 1st of May 2020 through to the end of August, we have a sort of finalization project, a finalization time for the projects through which we can do the reports, the monitoring, tidy up some of the student projects, and so on. September 2020 is the final assessment conference. And then November, the Attract Consortium, has to report its work to the Commission, which has paid for it. So I'm going to walk you through the documentation which is available now, and I would highly recommend that you download all these documents and read them all with some care. They're very easy to get at that URL. We've worked hard to make them clear and simple, and they'll answer a lot of your basic questions, I hope. But I'll walk you through what they are now so that you get sort of oriented. So proposal guidelines, exactly what you would suggest, what the name suggests, sorry. The funding and the project durations, exactly what the deliverables are, how we're doing the monitoring, the participation criteria, the project proposal format, submission and deadlines, and the evaluation process. Pretty straightforward. Proposal template. This is a really important document, and that's the whole document that you see in front of you. 2 pages for you to fill in to represent your project. Now, I would warmly encourage you to read the items in red on this very carefully, because we're defining the font size, we're defining the margins of the document. We want 4 pages only. There's a character count, I think, on each section. You can include tables and diagrams and so on, but doing so doesn't allow you to move beyond the 4-page limit of the document. So it's up to you to make that trade-off between area for graphics and getting all the words in that you want to include. But really have a look at that, really sort of absorb it, and if you're still not sure, there are ways to get more information. Now, I'm going to do a series of slides on the evaluation criteria here, because this will help guide you in terms of thinking about how the projects that you have in mind would fit with the way that we're going to be evaluating them. And you can see that we have a number of key main criteria, and all the questions within each of the sort of headline criteria are marked out of 5, but there are different weightings for each of the major criteria. So you can see under the project description, you can get up to 10 points by answering these 2 questions, but each of the questions, their weighting is only 1. So briefly, first question, are the project proposal objectives adequately and clearly defined? In other words, have you got your idea across to us clearly? Have you bounded it properly? Second question, have you explained it clearly? Second major criteria, the technology benchmark, and we're weighting this answer with 3, so you can get 15 points for this answer. Is the technology proposed for development clearly in advance on the state of the art? So that's saying, we care quite a lot about how new the science or technology that you're doing is. Then you can see that our third major criteria is the envisaged innovation potential, and there are 45 points available here. We're weighting each of the answers here 3. And the questions are, will the scientific use increase knowledge in the scientific disciplines mentioned? Will the expected advance have the potential to contribute to improved or new industrial applications? And can you see your new science and or your new industrial application benefiting European society and citizens? Because that is, after all, the overarching reason for Horizon 2020 funding in general, to make Europeans, to create value for European society and citizens. So given that there are 45 points available from this criteria, this major criteria, and those 3 questions, I'd say it's well worth you spending time thinking carefully about how you express your answers to that. Third major evaluation criteria, sorry, the fourth major evaluation criteria are basically about the credibility with which you describe and present your proposal. In other words, do we think it's a reasonable proposal? Do we think that you've thought deeply enough about it to do the work properly with the resources in the time? 4 questions, each only weighted 1, but 5 marks for each question, so 20 points from this set of criteria. So first question, are the project implementation steps concretely explained? In other words, have you really told us what you really plan to do? You've got 12 months. So before that 12 months start, have you really worked out what it is that you're going to do? Second question, you can read that for yourself, but it basically means, do we think that you can do that in 12 months? Is your plan achievable, reasonably achievable? Third question, again, you can read that for yourself, but again, simple question. Do we think that the money that we give you will be enough to achieve what you hope to achieve? And the fourth question is, does the proposal support openness? And this springs from the European Commission's current enthusiasm for open science, open innovation, and openness to the world. So you must take from that what you will. But you can see there are 5 points available there for the answer to that question. So I've set you up with what the proposal document is. I've pointed you to the where all the documents are online. I'll walk you through a handful more of those documents just so that you understand what they are and where they fit. This is the third-party project agreement, and this is the arrangement that the successful proposals sign with the consortium, and it defines the rights and obligations on each side and the relationship between the successfully funded projects and the consortium. If you are successfully funded, then we expect you to sign a third-party project agreement with the consortium's representative. Now, to do that, we need a lead participant to be. We need you to define a lead participant in your proposal team, and we also need you to show that they have given you the right to sign on their behalf. And so you would need, the lead participant in a team would need to get powers of attorney signed from their partners in their proposal team, just to show us, the consortium, that you actually have the right to sign the third-party project agreement with the consortium. Now, because the timescales are short and because we hope to fund 170 projects, and because this is about speed, the third-party project agreement is not negotiable. And so it's a 7-page document. We tried to make it as simple as possible, but it's not negotiable. So if you have a look at that and you find that in some way your organization couldn't accept its terms, then that's a negotiation internally for you to undertake. But we think and hope it's fairly straightforward, and it's been designed to enable this process to move quickly. Now, I include this as context because this is the agreement that the consortium signs with the Commission itself, and so that defines the relationship between the Commission and the Attract Consortium. It sets context for the third-party project agreement, and it sets out the IP regime in detail. And so you'll see in the third-party project agreement that there's a clause which basically says, refer to the grant agreement. Other documents that can help and support you, well, we have an FAQ online, and that's very helpful because it's growing and evolving as the call continues, and you can dig into that and search through it as a document. There's a FAQ as a web page with 10, I think it's 10 major points written at a high level, but you want to download the actual FAQ document to get the full detail. So we've done the FAQ at basically 2 levels for you. And again, I encourage you to dig into that, to word search on it in order to answer, to see if we got an answer to any of your questions before you go further. So my conclusion about Attract is that it's an opportunity for you to be ambitious, to think about some bit of breakthrough science or technology that you have in mind, which maybe you're finding difficult to fit into a research program, or which doesn't fit with funding criteria for other sources of money, and see if you can shape that in some way to fit the evaluation criteria for Attract, in order that you can explore that ambitious breakthrough idea and also show how it could be connected to the beginning of an innovation process, which, if everything goes well, would actually put the idea to work and start extracting new value from it in the context of science, in the context of industry, in the context of Europe. As I hope I've explained, we've tried to build a straightforward application process. We've limited the reporting overheads. We've created an opportunity for you to strengthen your networks with academia, with research infrastructure organizations, with businesses, with industry, with innovation specialists. We've created a mechanism by which, if you have people in your organization who are interested in entrepreneurship, are interested in the application of a scientific idea or a new technology, we have included mechanisms through which those can be explored. And again, those are the entrepreneurship courses, which will be offered at the Asade Business School, and the exploration of some of the funded project ideas by students at Alto Design Factory up in Espoo, using user-centered design thinking strategies. So that creates an opportunity for engaging young people and also for having new eyes look at your science or technology opportunity and think about it in new ways. Now, we talked a lot about attractors, this particular process for applying for these funds to get money to run work, to do work between the 1st of May 2019 and the end of April 2020. But there are other ways to engage. You could encourage other organizations in your ecosystem. You could encourage partners to apply if you don't have a project in mind, but you could see that they have something which, if they could get funding to develop it, it would be to your benefit. So I encourage you to encourage your ecosystem partners to do that if you can see that indirect way of getting involved. It's worth also noting that at the beginning of the funded project's 12 months, in other words, the beginning of May next year, we will have made public a list of 170 funded projects and their simple project summary that is part of the requirements of deliverables. So, mid-April, I guess, late April next year, you should be able to access a big list of what 170 funded projects are trying to do. And so if you can't engage directly or you don't get funded yourself, you may find an opportunity there, or at least the piece of work that you want to keep an eye on for the 12 months that the work is being done. Similarly, at the end of the projects, we'll be finalizing the projects, doing the reporting, and at that point, we should have another 170 more detailed project result summary documents to offer. And we're also expecting 170 journal type articles to be produced. So again, at that point, there's another opportunity to have a look and say, we couldn't engage and we weren't certain if the funded projects were going to work, but we've kept an eye on 2 or 3 of them because we think they were interesting, and now we can see that perhaps this is a moment to step in and propose a partnership. The final assessment conference, we hope, will be a place where a lot of that kind of partnerships, engagements, showcasing of results to potential partners, to industry, to other research organizations can happen. So I'd say keep an open mind and keep an eye on how Attract progresses, even if you can't directly engage now. So, as I say, we've created Attract to enable scientists and technologists to be ambitious, to reach for breakthroughs, and to shorten their path from breakthrough into an innovation process which will create value for science, for industry, for entrepreneurs, for young innovators, and we hope for European society.